Good morning, it's September 17th. This is To My Liberal Friends. When I was a young boy in the 50s and early 60s, there was a prediction that the Earth was going into another ice age. The polar caps would be extending, and we should be prepared to endure the cold. Well, that passed, and now we hear the warnings of the ice melting and coastal cities being flooded. By some of the alarmist warnings, Miami and several other cities should already be gone. And over the past half century, environmentalists have predicted countless calamities. Their extreme predictions were typically wrong. Their draconian countermeasures turned out to be mostly misguided, and we should be grateful we didn't follow their harmful advice. We need to keep this history in mind as we're inundated with more stories of climate Armageddon. This summer, headlines about the Great Barrier Reef in Australia painted a dire picture of climate-driven devastation, with environmental journalists claiming the reef was on the brink of collapse. In reality, data showed the reef had its fourth highest coral cover since records began in 1986. Revealing these alarmist narratives were, again, vastly misleading. Sensible, life-improving environmental policies over recent decades were rarely sold with fear-mongering. Rich countries have dramatically reduced air and water pollution through technological advances and then through regulation. Poorer countries are starting to do the same thing as they emerge from poverty and can afford to be more environmentally concerned. Forests have expanded globally, and with this growth, clear in rich countries and increasingly across the world. But yet we remain the BRICS, particularly Russia, India, and China, are the worst polluters in the world. And this isn't the scary future that we were promised by the environmentalists, though. The first well-known environmental scary story was in the 1968 book Population Bomb, which warned the global population was out of control and argued for widespread forced sterilization. Given the inevitability of hundreds of millions of hunger deaths, the book also argued we should stop food aid baskets to places like India. Thankfully, the world mostly ignored this misanthropic, immoral advice. Instead, scientists spearheaded the first green revolution that led to much higher crop yields and more than 1 billion more people being well fed. Today, India actually is the world's largest producer and exporter of rice. In 1972, the book Limits to Growth projected that food scarcity and pollution would cause global collapse. Time magazine predicted a future with a few gaunt survivors desperately tilling freeway center strips in what used to be Los Angeles. The world would run out of everything from aluminum and iron to oil and food. That was the mood that shaped the world's first UN Environmental Summit in 1972, when Chairman Maurice Strong declared that the world had only 10 years to avoid environmental catastrophe. He became the first director of the UN Environment Program and argued that doomsday was very probable unless we ended destructive economic growth. Thankfully, we didn't heed his advice either. Today, we're seeing declining birth rates, particularly in developed nations. And I find it a bit amusing that liberals now say we have to allow unchecked immigration because we need those people to do work. That's because we don't have enough people already. I can remember when there were predictions that we would run out of resources. We'd have to ration things. That turned out to be wrong as well. Instead, we chose innovation that allowed the world to dramatically increase supply while at the same time lowering costs. In 1980, we were told the world had enough oil for 30 years at the same level of consumption. Well, since then, we've used all the oil we were told was left and have 80% more. Now, due to better technology, we're being told that we have another 50 years of oil left, and that's at a much higher rate of consumption. And that may be wrong as well. The simplistic alarmist predictions of the 1970s set the tone for decades, and is still seen in the climate alarmism that argues for expensive, inefficient policies for recycling many of the old worries of not enough food, more weather catastrophes. Climate change it's definitely a real challenge, but like before, the scares are exaggerated. For food, this is clearly shown by one of the most quoted meta-studies in Nature. If there's no climate change, the world would see 51% more calories produced in 2050 than in 2010. Even with the vastly worse climate change than expected, food would instead only increase by 49%. Now that's a problem, but it's not the calamity they're predicting. And despite fear-mongering about weather disasters, the hard data shows that the death tolls from floods, droughts, storms, wildlife have declined dramatically over the past century, from 500,000 each year in the 20s to less than 9,000 globally in the past decade. A 98% reduction. Global climate-related damage, measured in percent of GDP of the UN, has been declining, not increasing since 1990. And these alarmist climate concerns have become enshrined in policy, with nearly every country now endorsing the idea of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The best academic estimates show that the costs outweigh the benefits in the 21st century by 7 to 1, with policies to achieve this goal costing an unaffordable $27 trillion annually. Here's the truth. The best solution to these predictions and the most cost-effective and efficient approach is to continue to invest in research and development for low-carbon energy. By doing this, there may come a time when green energy prevails simply because it will be cheaper and not because some government official and academics try to scare us into switching. The marketplace will drive the switch, and that's exactly how it should be done. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.